if you graduated before 1962, you didn't learn about DNA. Never mind mRNA. Anytime you can get someone to go beyond what it is they're reading and Google something or look something up and read about it, that is the secret recipe. There were, rumors that people were being injected with trackers, microchips that could track them and where they were going, or that people were being magnetized. Nothing that's happened in the last 30 or 40 years quite highlights or captures the problems that we have with science communication between scientists and health professionals and the general public the way the pandemic did.
This is episode 6 of Pizik Communication Interviews, and today our guest is Professor Shellie Richards, professor of the only science communication bachelor's program that is offered in the US at Vanderbilt University. And welcome, Professor Shellie Richards.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
For those who want to know more about you and your work, can you tell us what you do and why you do what you do?
Yes, I am a professor in the program for communication of science and technology at Vanderbilt University. And I was invited to the program after 23 years of working alongside scientists. I was approached to teach in the program, and I teach writing. And I think one of the reasons that I was approached is because I was always talking about the importance of communicating science with the professors and the scientists that I worked with. And so I feel very strongly about the communication of science with students and with the community and society in general.
And for those who haven't heard about the field before, can you define what is science communication basically?
Yes. So beyond what the words themselves say, it is the communication of any kind of technical information that is important with regards to matters of health, the climate, the planet that we live on. And there are all kinds of people that are doing it now. As you know, social media has really changed the way we communicate science, and there are science communicators everywhere, some educated, some not educated. When we teach science communication these days, we have to teach it hand in hand with media literacy. So educating students on sort of investigating what they hear, going beyond just videos on social media or things that they hear on TV and, reading about it to see what's true and what's not, where the scientific consensus lies. So it's a huge field, growing. And I think there are a couple of universities here that are also exploring programs in science communication as a result of our work.
If I'm not mistaken, there was one in the Wisconsin-Madison, there was one science communication program, but when I looked it up, it was mainly about health communication, life sciences.
Yes. So a lot of our so we pull from a bunch of different majors. So we have our science majors, chemistry, biology, physics, like you would expect, but we also have English majors, creative writing majors, people majoring in economics, and pre-law students. So we have a variety of students majoring in those fields and then double majoring or pairing it with their degree in science communication.
So science communication is basically writing, talking about science and science-related things.
That's right.
In general.
Yes, writing, film, making videos, of course, podcasting, and we've had some plays. The theater department at Vanderbilt have put on a series of short plays last year that dealt with climate change and climate grief. And then we've had people do art and poetry that bring in scientific themes as well. So a lot of different ways that you can communicate about science, not just the traditional ways that we think about.
And I had I've been grappling with one question for over 3-4 months now. When I started when I took a gap year this year, I've set a question to myself of one question, and I've consulted many books of Carl Sagan and some science popularizers. I think I found the answer, but not quite yet. And the question is, why do we need to communicate science in the first place, fundamentally, at a deeper level? why do we need to communicate it?
I think, and this is my answer to that question, but I believe that knowledge is power. And that sharing knowledge, specifically about science, is how we survive as a species, right? On a planet that is warming, with food that is in danger of disappearing, with the fish and what is happening in our oceans, with developing clean energy and communicating about clean energy sources and about diseases and pandemics that are growing. Not just viruses, but bacteria, parasites, fungus, things like this. So I really think that knowledge is power, and that when we communicate about science, we equip the people around us in our community alongside us with knowledge that they can take with them and use to survive in a planet that is changing.
Have you
that's my answer.
Yeah, when I read Demon Haunted World of Carl Sagan, I came to conclusion, I had a different perspective based on the answer of Carl Sagan. He wrote in his Demon Haunted World that I don't know if it's truly a right answer, because I've taken the perspective of Carl Sagan and draw my own conclusion. So he told that when we strip the society from science, when we don't communicate science, people will basically fall to superstitions, pseudoscience abounds, because if we don't have science, people will believe in this kind of occult sciences. And what this basically means, when they don't practice science and believe in those occult sciences, he will tell that people start becoming less serious, less critical. They would not think critically about life. And then my conclusion comes in. I thought, if they don't think critically or seriously about life, they will not challenge the pre-established series in sciences or in any subjects. And that basically means there will not be any progress. Society does not function as it is.
Right. That's right. And that goes back to how knowledge is power.
Yeah.
Right. And when I talk about knowledge, and in this case, talking about scientific knowledge, right? It really is power. And it really is the only way I think that we as a species are going to survive all of these things that are happening on our planet right now.
Yeah.
And I think right now we see that there's a divide, right? There are people who are very accepting of science and scientific conclusions and whether or not we should take vaccines and how we approach disease and clean energy sources. And then there are people that are, leaning into conspiracy theories and things like that. So kind of the more things change, the more they stay the same. There's always been people who were very deeply rooted in science and fact and what can be proven, and people who are superstitious, right?
Okay. I've read about your background from your website and your page in Vanderbilt's faculty, and I think you had a really interesting family background.
Yes.
And my question is, how did your background and culture shape your science communication journey, or maybe your life in general?
Yeah. That's really a great question. And I had never really thought about it. I mean, I talked to the students about my background when I'm introducing myself, but never really thought about it quite the way I have since you posed that question. But I came from an immigrant family on both sides. On one side, they were very highly educated. They fled here from a communist country. They had college degrees and very strong opinions about freedom of speech, and the things that they studied. On the other side of the family, they were immigrants, but they were farmers. They came here from another country because they wanted to farm, and not educated. So 12 children who all at the age of 12 and 13 stopped their formal education and came back to the farm to work. They had a lot of biases and prejudices that the other side of the family did not. They were not educated. They could not do math. Some of them could not read and write beyond a third grade level. My grandmother on that side of the family never worked. She never drove a car. Her husband, my grandfather, died early. So she was left alone with all of these children, not knowing how to balance her money that she had in the bank. He, couldn't add and subtract. On the other side of the family, I had grandparents who had PhDs and master degrees. All of my aunts and uncles on that side of the family were very highly educated. They were writers and instructors. And so when I was growing up, I had two entirely different experiences when I went from one side of the family to visit to the other. And one thing I knew pretty early on is that I wanted to constantly interrogate and question what I believed and why, and I wanted to educate myself the way that my one side of the family was. I didn't want to be helpless, like I saw my grandmother on the other side of the family, not able to take care of herself, and everyone had to pitch in. And the one thing that she didn't have is she didn't have that education. Two very different experiences when I was growing up. And I think I felt pretty strongly about wanting to be independent and also wanting to be educated because of that.
Mm. Can you list the top 5 most fun aspects of your job?
Yes, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
One is connecting with students ages 18 to 22.
Mm-hmm.
Helps me stay young in the way that I think. So they challenge me. And I love that. I love having students in the class who shed light on something or think about something in a way that I've never considered it.
Mm-hmm.
I love students sharing about themselves. One of the things that they have to do in my technical writing class, one of the very first things they have to do is write a personal statement. And most of them are headed to graduate and medical school, but some of them are going directly into the workforce. And so writing about themselves. I love reading their stories. I love being immersed in an environment where everyone is thinking about things and sharing their perspectives and their ideas, whether it's about teaching or science communication or something else. Because in our department, we have people who specialize in rhetoric. We have a chemist, we have a biologist, we have a physicist, we have writers. We have people who teach in theater. We have people in earth and environmental sciences. We have all these mix of people who come together, and I find that exciting. So I think the students are probably my very favorite part of my job. I had no idea how much I would love teaching until I started doing it, because up until that point, I was a writer who worked alongside scientists. And so I spent a lot of time in my office alone editing scientific manuscripts for publication in journals. So I really like, being around that age group, I think is important. And I also think that I think this generation is the key to our future. I mean, I think the future is definitely in their hands. I think that they will solve problems that we never could.
Mm-hmm. You talked about how before you started teaching, you were a writer.
Yes.
So what kind of writing actually did you specialize in? Was it science journalism or typical writer?
So my training is I did a lot of scholarly writing in graduate school, but I also specialized in fiction writing. But at Vanderbilt, for the last 20 years before I started teaching, I edited scientific manuscripts written by graduate students and professors. And I also edited grants. So when people would apply to government agencies and foundations for money, and then also edited some contracts, reviewed contracts to make sure that language was clear. So even though my background is not in science, I've spent 20 years reading.
I think one of your books won November Molecule, won 2 Bookfest. So as a writer, can you share us strategies or maybe your art of writing that that are essential to you and that can help us as communicators to engage people in science or in any other topic? You're writing what we call kind of recipe.
Yeah, I think it is important to write in a way that stirs curiosity and the imagination. And so some of the science in the November molecule is real, right? Some of it is completely made up, right? But people that read the book would say, I looked this up to see if it was real, or I looked this up and read about this. I had no idea what the hygiene hypothesis was. And so I think anytime you can get someone to go beyond what it is they're reading and Google something or look something up and read about it, that's a win. And so I've read books about the fiction books about that took place in England during the time of the plague. And then that made me want to read about the plague. Or books that I've read about massive storms that made me want to read about weather and about climate change, or look up things about HIV and AIDS, or Ebola, or any kind of tropical diseases. And so a lot of the fiction, not all of the fiction, but a lot of the fiction that I read makes me want to put the book down and immediately pick up my computer and look something up to see if it's real or not, or if what they're saying about it is real, or if there are photos or images of it anywhere. And I think anytime that you're writing about science, and this is true in movies too, right? We see things in movies and sometimes it's fiction and sometimes it's very, very close to the truth. So, I think anytime that you can stir someone's imagination in a way that they go and look something up. So, and I think that involves writing about science in a way that engages in very much a storytelling way, using metaphor and things like that, and avoiding language that is isolating, avoiding jargon and using plain language and describing something in a way that makes people want to know more about it. I think that is the secret recipe.
Yeah. And what kind of challenges did you face in your writing experience or in your science communication journey?
Well, today, like I said, you can't really communicate or teach about communicating science and technology without also talking about media literacy.
Yeah.
And it's changing because so many of our students are getting information from videos, right? And so talking about how we fact check things, how we know where the scientific consensus is, I think that is probably the biggest challenge today. And students, because they are watching a lot of videos, this impacts the brain, obviously, in ways that reduce some students' ability to focus for long periods of time. Yeah. So I have started emphasizing the importance of reading instead of watching a video about something. Maybe read a couple of paragraphs, a book, an article, and if you can't hold your focus long enough to do that, then start small. Start with something that interests you and read just a little bit every day. I think that's probably the biggest challenge these days is having people, explaining about all of the pitfalls that can occur when you get your information from social media, and getting back to reading more.
And as a side note, interesting question, what is your favorite book?
Lately, I read the book Sapiens, which is like a history of us early on. Yeah. That was a great book. I love that book. And right now I'm reading the book Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. It's a fiction book, like Sapiens, and it is sort of the story of Shakespeare and his wife and children. And it is some fiction and some truth. And so some of the things I've put down the book and gone to look up to see how much of it is real. But it actually is the story of Shakespeare's son who died at age 11 from the plague, as told by Maggie O'Farrell. So, and because I'm reading about the plague, I've gone of course, sort of refreshed myself on what the plague was, where it came from, the symptoms, and how many people survived it or didn't survive it, and new theories about how the people that survived it may have been the earliest individuals who suffered from autoimmune diseases. So that's how they think some people actually survived the plague. And we have a couple of cases in the US right now. There are people that have been diagnosed with the plague. So it's actually still around.
Interesting. And you talked about one form of science communication, which is poetry. How do you think,
Yes.
like, poetry? I think you also write poetry, like poems. Like, I've read some of them, and how, like, most of your poems were not about science, though, like, some of them had, like, some scientific elements. What do you think, like, how can poetry communicate science, and how is it effective in communicating?
Well, that is a great question. I have a lot to say about that. For starters, there was a movement here in the U.S., the March for Science, that started as the result of a single poem that was written by Jane Hirschfield called "On the Fifth Day," and it talks about how scientists were silenced and the people that wrote about rivers and studied the rivers could no longer write about them or study them. And in this poem, she talks about how the rivers now have to speak for themselves. It's a great poem, but that poem she read in Washington, D.C., sparked the March for Science, which then occurred for several years following the publication of that poem. That poem also started a movement where people started writing, scientists and non-scientists alike started writing poems about science. And at Kent State University in Ohio, they have an entire program called the Traveling Stanzas. And it's essentially these poems that they take with them all over the U.S. They've been to Vanderbilt. So the Traveling Stanzas brought with them a group of poems, beautiful poems, written about science and technology with them to Vanderbilt. And then the students came and visited the exhibit and also wrote their own poems and did what they call erasure poetry, where you take a paragraph about science and you just blot out some of the words and create your own poem from the language that's contained in that paragraph. So it's not something that you would typically think of, but there's actually quite a bit that poetry and poets can do for the communication of science. It's a very different way of looking at science through the poet's lens.
Yeah.
So we actually might invite them back. I think now it's been several years. I think if they came back to Vanderbilt, because our science communication program has grown, and because we're doing things a little bit differently, we could probably have a pretty big event around these scientific or science themed poems.
Yeah, like, I would be excited to, like, join. Really.
Yes.
Yep. I think we can transition to the next stage of the interview, which is about COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the issues in science communication domain is basically was the breakdown in science communication during the pandemic. And you actually investigated the science communication, the language used by journalists during one of your fellowships, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I still am. That research is ongoing.
Yeah. So what are your insights? And basically, what have you, like, learned and want to share with us?
Well, for starters, I think nothing that's happened in the last 30 or 40 years quite highlights or captures the problems that we have with science communication between scientists and health professionals and the general public the way the pandemic did. There was a lot of confusion. There was a lot of mixed messages about the virus, about if it can live on surfaces, how long can it live on surfaces, should we be wearing masks? In the beginning, they were like, masks aren't going to help. And then, no, you need to wear masks. And then there was no vaccine. And then you had all of these people working on a vaccine, and things moved very quickly. And because the virus was mutating, so was the information that we were getting in the news. And one of the things that I wanted to look at in the news was whether or not scientists talk about disease differently than journalists or nurses or doctors. Because when they had people in the news talking about the virus in the beginning, they used words like mysterious and deadly together. And so people were really scared. When something's mysterious, right, you don't understand it.
No.
When scientists talk about something that we don't understand, they usually use words like unknown. And when you use a word like unknown, that means we don't know right now, but we will know. We will figure this out. Where when you're talking about a mystery, sometimes you don't always figure out something when it's mysterious. And so those kinds of words were being used in the news a lot. And the first wave of our research, what I found is that no one was talking to scientists. Scientists were not being interviewed by journalists. They were talking to nurses, and they were talking to doctors, and they were talking to the head of the CDC here in the US, the Center for Disease Control. But the scientists were not being talked to. And I think that's an important point because they do talk about disease very differently than doctors and other people who are not working in labs and studying viruses and or developing vaccines. So it was a very confusing time, and a time also when scientists just weren't in the news.
Do you have any other examples of like mysterious and unknown? I was a bit even more curious about the words used in the news.
Yeah. That's probably my best example. But I think also scientists are better at talking about uncertainty.
Yeah.
And where you might hear the word confusing from a reporter, or, we're not really sure what to do, phrases that convey, I don't know what a good word is, just, I guess, confusion, where scientists lean into what we know, right? So what we know and what we don't know. So there's like essentially two baskets, right? When you're talking to a scientist, there's what they know and what they don't know. And they talk a lot about what we know right now, right? What we know is true today, but we may find out something different tomorrow. And how that translates when it's not a scientist talking is usually chaos or confusion or misunderstanding. Sometimes mis and disinformation can arise as a result of that. And I think most scientists are fairly transparent. And when I've studied language, one of the things that has come up is how important certainty is to people. So you can imagine if you go to the doctor and you're sick, and the doctor is certain that they know what is wrong with you and certain that they can fix it, how important that is when you're a patient, versus if you go to the doctor and they're like, I don't really know what's wrong with you. I have no idea what this is, and I really don't know how to fix it. Maybe they know and they don't. Maybe they know what's wrong, but they just don't know how to fix it. I think human beings really want that certainty. And because scientists are often so transparent about uncertainty, like that's just part of doing science. You do experiments. Sometimes they work out. Sometimes they don't. You have a hypothesis. Sometimes you can prove it. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you end up proving something entirely different than what you thought you were going to be able to prove. And scientists are used to that uncertainty. But I think the broader public is not. And so, that impacts the language that they use. And it doesn't always land with the general public or a general audience because they like certainty. And uncertainty is a difficult thing for a lot of people.
We've covered the pandemic. And have there been any cases of disinformation during the pandemic?
Yes, a lot of disinformation about what medications that you might take that might work, about how dangerous vaccines are. I think when you are giving a vaccine to someone, when you're getting a vaccine and you're not a scientist and you're not a doctor, it is a leap of faith, right? When someone tells you this is going to help you or prevent you from getting this disease, the people that are getting the vaccine, they don't understand how the vaccine formulated, how the vaccine works, and that can be really scary. It really is a leap of faith for those people. They're trusting scientists and doctors that they're telling them something is going to help them. And I think also, what was being injected. There were, rumors that people were being injected with trackers, microchips that could track them and where they were going, or that people were being magnetized somehow. There were all kinds of conspiracy theories and disinformation during the pandemic. Another one that comes to mind is when people get packages delivered to the house, they would leave the boxes out on their porch for several days for fear that the virus could live on a cardboard box for days on end, which is not exactly how viruses work. And so there was a lot of disinformation around just how long the virus could live, whether or not it was airborne was another thing that it took a while. And it took a while for scientists to figure out the answers to these questions. And so during that time, while the scientists were trying to figure out what was going on, these conspiracy theories and disinformation campaigns kind of cropped up. And they spread very, very quickly. In a matter of minutes, someone can post something, someone in Europe can post it, and all of a sudden, people in Africa and Australia and Asia and the US are reposting. It does not take long for something to go viral. So,
while I read some, when I started my research, I actually read some articles, manuscripts about deficit model and the recent participatory two-way communication model. Can you explain to our audience what deficit, and maybe some real life examples where it broke down the communication of sciences?
Well, the deficit model in this case, with regard to the pandemic, would just be the assumption that if we just fill in the knowledge gaps with people, that if we just give them facts, that will solve all of the problems, right? That there's just this deficit of knowledge, of facts that people have. And that once they have those facts, once they have that knowledge, that makes everything okay. And it just doesn't always work that way. And sometimes people end up with more questions, more unanswered questions that they had to begin with. And for some people, facts aren't enough, right? There's been a lot of research, not my own, but there's been a lot of research done on how this doesn't work. Just making sure that people have the knowledge, putting the facts out there is not the answer. That you have to go a little bit deeper and consider how people come to believe and trust the things that they believe in and trust, that it isn't always about the facts.
Yeah. And did they actually establish this kind of two-way communication style during the pandemic? Because
we definitely had some scientists at Vanderbilt who went out into the community and gave some town hall type talks, at some homes for elderly, some nursing homes, some places where you might have a group of people who, haven't been in school in 40 and 50 years and so don't understand the science. Or, in the U.S., if you graduated before, 1962, you didn't learn about DNA. Never mind mRNA. You didn't even know about DNA. It wasn't taught back then. So you have this huge population, aging people in America who just didn't understand the science because they never had it, because when they were in school, it didn't exist. And even if they went to college, that science did not yet exist. So we had a lot of people going out into the community and giving talks at churches and nursing homes and other community events about the importance of masking and washing hands and staying home if you were sick, and at home COVID tests.
And the final part would be about Vanderbilt's Communication of Science and Technology major. And in fact, it is written in their website, it is the I think only undergraduate science communication program in the US. And
Yes.
it is offered by Vanderbilt Arts and Science College. And actually, Professor Shellie Richards is undergraduate director for the program.
Yes.
And about the course and your teachings, I think I've found some of your courses, and one of them that really stood out to me was Laughable, the Science of Humor and the Humor of Science.
Yes.
I was really interested in that. And can you talk more about the course and what are the most appealing sides of it?
The most appealing.
Yeah, appealing elements, what students get, learn from the course.
Well, we actually had Professor Clements come to our class, and we did a lot of improv exercises, which themselves make people laugh. But the whole idea behind improv is to put people in situations where they have to be empathetic with one another, where they really have to help each other in these exercises that we do, which is an important part of science communication. But humor, interestingly enough, is a very complicated thing. It's something that's unique to human beings. In order for something to be humorous, and this is the science behind humor, it has to be two things. It has to be a transgression, and it has to be benign, so not harmful. And so if something is only a transgression and it's not benign, it's harmful, then it's not funny. And if something is only benign and it's not a transgression, that's also not funny. And so we start by defining scientifically what humor is and what makes us laugh. And then we talk about the different ways that you can use humor to communicate science. People are always really engaged when there is something funny going on. And so in the class, our students wrote limericks, which is kind of a humorous poetry. They put together short skits that were humorous. We watched some films that incorporated humor and science at the same time. We only offered it once. It was a freshman seminar, so it's not a standing course in CSET, but it was a lot of fun when we offered it.
And about the CSET program, how and why actually did the program come about? And why only at Vanderbilt?
Well, it came about in 1997. An astrophysicist who worked at Vanderbilt was approached by a student who wanted to study science communication. And so Dr. David Weintraub put together a group of courses that he thought incorporated enough science and enough communication that this student could study science communication. That was in 1997. That was just one student. 2 years later, it became officially a minor. And then in 2006, it became a major. There was no budget for the program. There was no staff. There was not an official curriculum for CSET. And then fast forward to 2018, and in the College of Arts and Science, the dean was looking at a few programs that were really small to see whether or not those programs should remain or whether they were so small that they just needed to go away. There just weren't enough students interested in majoring or minoring. And the dean at the time came across CSET and called in Professor Weintraub and said, we either need to turn this into something real or it needs to go away. I think that science communication is really important. I would like for this to remain. I would like for you to have a budget. I would like for you to have a staff member. And so CSET sort of became official in 2018. And then in 2020, we got a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. And the grant was designed to rewrite the curriculum so that students who were not STEM, who were not majoring in biology or chemistry or physics, had a path to major or minor in the communication of science and technology. So we were hoping that we would get some students from economics, from the creative writing, English, history programs. And so to mix with our engineering and science majors.
Yeah.
So more students coming from psychology, more of our pre-law majors. And they love it because in all areas of expertise, there is jargon. There is language that is isolating, that needs to be broken down so that you can understand. So if you're not a lawyer, you're sitting across from someone who is a lawyer, they're probably using words that are unfamiliar to you. That's the same with an economist or a financial person, or, of course, people in physics or civil engineering or some field like that. And it's just grown from there. I think when I joined, we had 6 majors in 2018, and now we have 100. So, and I don't know why, except to say that this all started with a single student at Vanderbilt. There are definitely other universities. When we go and present at meetings and conferences about our program, I always have people from other universities come up and say, we're interested in starting a program ourselves. Sometimes it's universities in Canada, sometimes it's other universities here in the US. And so I think students are absolutely interested in it. And so I think universities are also interested in starting programs. I think we'll see more programs like ours in the future. And I think if someone's at a university where there is not a program for science communication, my advice to those students would be to make sure that when they're not taking their science courses, and it doesn't matter, it could be psychology or sociology or the history of science or physics or chemistry or biology, to make sure that they are also taking writing courses or podcasting courses if they're being offered, or filmmaking. We have a geological filmmaking course at Vanderbilt, or some kind of communication. It doesn't really matter what it is. It doesn't have to be writing. It could be anything, so that they're mixing their curriculum so that it's a nice balance of science and or technology and communication.
What do you think about science, technology, and society major? Like, are they related, the CSET and STS? Are they related programs, or do they study different things?
No, it's a brand new Vanderbilt. Are you talking about the new requirements that we have for our freshmen and sophomores?
In many universities, I haven't looked it up on Vanderbilt, I saw the STS program, Science, Technology, and Society, or they might call it like Science and Technology study. Yeah. Are they similar in nature?
I've never read about them, but I would say based on the title of the program, it sounds very similar.
Yeah.
So we've talked about changing the name of CSET because the E in CSET doesn't stand for anything. It does not stand for engineering. I think originally was supposed to be, the communication of science, engineering, and technology, but the School of Engineering did not approve of that name. And so it is just the program for the communication of science and technology. The E is just there.
Yeah.
So we've talked about changing the name of our program, and we have floated some names that are a lot like that: science, technology, and society. I mean, it sounds like science communication and science and technology communication to me, just based on the title and not knowing anything about the program.
Yeah, but the course requirements are actually pretty different because
they are.
CSET was actually different. CSET was unique. I saw it.
Okay.
Yeah.
No. So that makes me want to read about those programs. So now, probably after we end this podcast, I will then go and search those programs to see what they're about.
Yeah, the reason I'm talking, because the requirement courses, if I'm not mistaken, was in Vanderbilt, Science for Everyone.
Yes.
It was mostly about science and society. But those programs had some tracks, biotechnology. There was a communication in media, but not typically not communication of sciences in media. And there were if I'm not mistaken, catastrophic places. There was one track. Yeah, there are, and at Brown there was like I finally found some science communication major at Brown, and STS had a track called Science Communications, and also representing science and literature and culture. And I'm planning to combine it with physics, maybe with STS at Brown while in my application, and like combine it like with science communication and physics.
Okay. All right. I'll have to check that out.
And one of the final questions is for those students who are interested in SciComm, like science communication, including me, could you share tips and suggestions how to get started with their own science communication journey, on how to like design their science communication, maybe it be it writing or just blogging or maybe outreach or whatever? Any tips and strategies? Yeah, suggestions.
This sounds like a question you should answer. People should do exactly what you're doing. Exactly what you're doing. So looking for programs in science communication or programs that are science communication adjacent, attending conferences and meetings about science communication when you can, or attending meetings about science where you have the opportunity to communicate about science or science communication, writing about it, or podcasting and hosting interviews just like this one are a great way, I think, to start. All of it counts. All of it counts. So I hope that in the future in the U.S. that we actually have more meetings that bring in the topic of science communication. We have a few meetings here in the U.S., but I think Europe is really, at their universities and sometimes even with their governments, there is an entire institution that's dedicated to the communication of science with their citizens. And so that's something that I think would be interesting.
What about like I've seen Public Communication of Science and Technology Network, PCST.
Yes, that's right.
And there was today I've actually seen one conference that would happen in February in, I think, Saudi Arabia, like in Arabian countries. Yeah, like I'm planning to register. Like they have like membership. Like I would be really excited to like attend my first science communication meeting. Like maybe if I register.
Yes, that is a great. You will love that. I've attended several of their meetings. The big international meeting happens every other year. So not every year, but every other year. And I think I attended one in Greece. The last one was in Greece. And before that, Amsterdam. I've attended several. And it's a great meeting. There's a great group of people that arrange all of the talks. That's the biggest one, I think. When it comes to, anywhere in the world. I think the PCST, Public Communication for Science and Technology, is a great meeting. If they're hosting something and you can register, you should absolutely go.
Like, will you come actually to the Arabian meeting? Like, I think it's...
No, only because I'm limited in my financial resources at Vanderbilt. And so traveling internationally is something that I can really only do every other year.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's a great opportunity for someone like you to network with other people and connect on LinkedIn and other different ways. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that concludes our conversation. Thank you, Professor Shellie Richards, for joining the interview and
thank you
sharing your experience. It's been really wonderful to talking with you, and thank you for supporting our project and me, and thank you for joining.
Absolutely.